Gather around, my young friends, and listen closely. I want to pass down to you a true story today. It is a story about a dark, cold garden, a sleeping disciple, and the single most protected word in all of human history. Sit with me for a little bit because this isn't just some dusty ancient history lesson. This is about a profound word that has probably already found its way into your own life, yet it holds this secret, staggering weight that you might have never fully known.
And our story begins in the garden at midnight.
You see, it begins not in a brightly lit classroom, but deep in the shadows. I want you to picture this vividly in your mind. It's a few hours past midnight on an isolated hillside, covered in these ancient, gnarled olive trees. The only men fully awake anywhere near this garden are the ones actively coming to make an arrest. And through the heavy darkness, a drifting, sorrowful Peter, who is just heavy with grief and sleep, hears his beloved teacher praying just a stone's throw away, with his face pressed into the cold ground. Decades later, history tells us that a man named Mark carefully wrote down the exact Aramaic syllables that Peter remembered leaving Jesus' lips that night. He didn't just translate the theological idea into Greek, he miraculously preserved the very sound of it, the word Abba. He did this so that readers who couldn't understand the language, and all of us reading it centuries later, would never lose the exact sound of it ringing out in the dark.
But as this deeply sacred story was passed down through the long generations, it ran into a well-meaning mistake. Well-meaning teachers accidentally spun a myth about this specific word. It is a comforting rumor, and honestly, it's one you have likely heard yourself in a Sunday sermon, maybe read in a paperback, or even seen printed on a coffee mug. In the mid-century, a devout and brilliant scholar named Joachim Jeremias desperately wanted to show the warmth of Jesus' prayer life. To illustrate this beautiful closeness, he described Abba as baby talk. This single, compelling thought literally spread like wildfire, making millions of people genuinely believe Jesus prayed like a toddler safely crawling into a lap, simply saying, "Daddy."
It was a truly beautiful, tender thought. But my young friends, scholarship is a slow, stubborn kind of love that demands the absolute truth. By the 1980s, a highly respected linguist named James Barr published a definitive academic paper bluntly titled "Abba Isn't Daddy." He decisively proved that the daddy theory was completely untrue based on the linguistic evidence of the time. In fact, this was a gentle correction that even Jeremias himself eventually accepted in his later years. The deep intimacy of the word was real, sure, but the smallness, the childishness of it, well, that was a mistake.
So, to really get this, we have to look at the weight of a word. To truly understand the magnificent gift we were given, we have to leave the soft safety of the nursery behind and journey back to the humble, dusty kitchen tables of ancient Galilee. We need to see the true heavy weight of this word in its natural, rugged habitat. In the everyday Aramaic spoken in the streets and homes of Jesus' world, the plain, basic word for father was simply Av, but Abba is what grammarians call the emphatic state. It is absolutely not baby talk. It is the honorable, heavy, immensely respectful word you reach for when the man is standing right in front of you and you are speaking face to face. It is the vast difference between calmly saying a father and boldly declaring the Father.
This brings up a crucial question we have to ask ourselves. If it wasn't just a toddler's innocent babble, who was actually permitted to use this powerful, emphatic family word in the ancient world? Answering this question changes everything about our story.
Listen closely to the specific voices who historically held the right to use this word. It was the solemn vocabulary of grown sons and daughters respectfully addressing their fathers. It was carefully used by devoted adult students speaking to their revered, lifetime teachers. It was even bestowed as a title of deep communal respect for weathered, poor old men whose righteous prayers could miraculously bring rain, like the famous Jewish sage Abba Hilkiah. But ancient tradition drew a strict, unyielding fence around this holy word. Household servants were never, ever allowed to say it. The privilege of the word stopped firmly and legally at the family line.
And that brings us to the spirit of adoption.
This is exactly where our tale shifts magnificently, because Jesus, the absolute rightful owner of this word, did something truly staggering with this fiercely protected, holy boundary. He took this revered family word, which was entirely his by natural, divine right, and he daringly gave it away. When his disciples asked him how to pray, he deliberately placed this heavy, intimate royal word directly into the mouths of outcast tax collectors, societal rejects, and rough, uneducated fishermen who permanently smelled like the sea and sweat. He looked at them and told them, when you pray, say Father. Decades later, the Apostle Paul passionately passed this exact liberating truth to the early, struggling churches spread across the Roman Empire. Look at how he brilliantly welds the original Aramaic word directly to the dignified Greek word for the Father. He didn't use a translated Greek pet name. He deliberately kept the heavy, honorable Aramaic word intact to explain the mighty, world-altering spirit of adoption.
You absolutely must understand. For Paul and his first-century readers, adoption wasn't just a soft, emotional metaphor meant to make you feel good. It was a binding, permanent Roman courtroom transaction known as huiothesia. It was the exact same, irrefutable legal process that historically turned the unknown teenager Octavian into Augustus Caesar, the unrivaled master of the entire world. This legal act instantly wiped out all old debts and permanently granted the newly adopted son the father's name, his absolute legal standing in society, and a full, undisputed share in the inheritance.
Think about what this meant for that ancient, unyielding fence we talked about earlier. It was utterly torn down. The word that previously separated fearful servants working strictly for wages on the outside from beloved children resting safely on the inside was legally placed in your mouth by an act of heavenly adoption that the Roman courts themselves would have instantly recognized. You don't say Abba to work up a temporary religious feeling. You say it to state a concrete legal fact about who you have ultimately become.
But this glorious inheritance leads us to the hill of shadows. My young friends, this magnificent family inheritance, this extraordinary right to the word, came at an unimaginable, heartbreaking cost. We see this vividly as our story necessarily travels from the quiet, shadowed olive grove to a dark, terrible hill. When Jesus prayed Abba in Gethsemane, with his face pressed into the dirt, sweat like blood, and a sorrow actively crushing his physical body, it wasn't the babble of a toddler safely tucked away in a nursery. It was the heavy, desperate, completely honest, yet completely surrendered cry of a grown son facing absolute terror, telling his father he didn't want to die, but firmly choosing his father's will anyway.
Mark starkly records Jesus praying aloud only twice in his final agonizing hours, and the contrast is just devastating. First, as the story unfolds, he prays the intimate family word Abba at midnight in the garden. But then, the very next afternoon, as the sky turns black, at the 9th hour on the cross of Golgotha, the family word is entirely gone from his lips. He instead prays Eloi, Eloi, the ancient, agonizing, terrifying song of the utterly abandoned. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is the 22nd Psalm. On that cross, the only man in all of human history who held the absolute natural right to the family word deliberately went to the one agonizing place in the universe where it was not on his lips. He prayed the devastating cry of the absolute outsider.
And this is the great exchange of our story. He stood willingly in the far place, completely in the dark, so that you could eternally stand in the near place, in the light. He prayed the orphan's desolate psalm into the darkness so that the legal paperwork of your adoption could be fully signed in heaven and the family word could be handed to you forever. The word is not cheap. It was paid for at the highest possible price the universe has ever known.
So, as you carry this beautiful ancient story forward into your own life, into those deeply human moments when you might find yourself crying out from the floor at 3 in the morning, I ask you to reflect on this. Which half of this word do you personally need most right now? Do you need its incredible face-to-face nearness and warmth, or do you desperately need the unshakable binding legal weight of your adoption? The profound truth is you have both. Never let this word grow cheap or slack in your mouths. It is the majestic vocabulary of supreme belonging, perfectly holding closeness and immense honor in a single breath. It was purchased at the highest cost imaginable so that the door could never ever be shut on you again. And that is the true story of Abba. Take it, hold it closely, and let it live in you forever.